Hello everybody and welcome to a tutorial for getting started with Pokemon Decomp hacking. I'm going to assume two things in this tutorial series. One is that you have a Windows computer with either Windows 10 or Windows 11, and two, that you are able to run a virtual machine on your computer, specifically having Linux installed in a virtual machine with WSL. Now, I'm not going to go through the process of showing how to do that because I don't want to uninstall mine and redo it all on video, but what I have is in the very top of the description of this video is going to be a link to download a text document that I have on my MediaFire, and that text document has step by step from start to finish how to get WSL running with Ubuntu on a virtual machine on your computer. It's going to be at the top of the description. Once that is done, we will get to this point where we're at here. You can see I'm in my user folder in this command window, and we are going to get the source files for Pokemon. So just to start out, I'm going to type in dir. It's just going to show everything that's in my users folder. We're going to make a directory, call it decomps, and that adds a file into our users folder. We're going to go into decomps, and there's two things we need to clone. So we're going to type git clone github.com/pret, and the first one we're going to get is agbcc. This could take a few minutes. It's going to receive objects, and that is entirely based off of your internet speed. And then the last thing it does is it updates the files, and that is based off of the number of threads that your processor has. When it's done, you will get this green and blue line again. And the second thing that we can get clone github.com/pret, and this is where you will choose your Pokemon game. So you can do Poke Ruby, you can do Poke Emerald, or you can do Poke Fire Red. Now for this tutorial series, I'm just going to go with Emerald. That's the main one that everybody chooses. It's going to clone into Poke Emerald. Again, receiving objects is based off of your internet download speed. You can see mine is 2.2 megabytes a second. Hopefully yours is a lot faster. Once it receives the objects and it gets into updating the files, again, that is processor thread count oriented. And when that finishes, you will be back to your where you can put in a command line, and we will continue from there. I'm going to try to keep this all in real time, minimizing the cuts just to alleviate any confusion. This should be wrapping up here momentarily. And now it just has to update the files. I should note that because I'm recording and running a virtual machine, it's gonna take a little bit longer than it normally would. So this is kind of like a rough estimate on how long it would take. My laptop has a Ryzen 5 processor, 5th gen Ryzen 5 processor. So I have 12 threads available. And even with 12 threads, because I'm recording, running a virtual machine, and there's background processes, it can still be a little bit taxing on the system. So long as you don't have something like an i3 or like a 1st or 2nd gen Ryzen 3, you should be alright. It'll just take quite a bit longer if you have those. I probably won't cut the video until we get to actually making the Pokemon ROM itself by compiling the source code. That takes my computer upwards of like 8 to 10 minutes. So that is probably when I will decide to cut. We're about halfway done with updating the files now. And as we near the end, when I get to the part where we actually make the ROM file, I will show the differences in terms of if you wanted like Ruby version, Sapphire version, Fire Red, Leaf Green, stuff like that, because there are different commands that you have to put in that correspond to the Pokemon game that you want to build. Obviously, I'm going to be showing how to do Emerald, but I will also show the different words that you will put in for the different versions. They're pretty much all the same. It's pretty self-explanatory for the most part. Alright, we're nearing completion. We're at the final 10% for updating the files for Poke Emerald. A very short moment and we will be done. Okay, now that that's finished, we're gonna close out of that. You can see in your users folder, Decomps, we have AGBCC and we have Poke Emerald. What we're going to do is Windows R, type WSL, and reopen Linux. Give it a second to get the line open. And we are going to type cd decomps to get into the decomps folder. We're gonna just type directory just to see what we have. We're going to go into AGBCC. So now that we are in there, it's time to build the actual packages for compiling the ROM. So we're going to type /build.sh, and it is making the first directory. This can take a couple of minutes. It's really not too long. Don't worry if you see the purple text that says warning or error. Just let it run its course. so long as it doesn't stop and say something like press any key to continue or press this key to close, you should be alright. It'll stop periodically, but just let it run its course. I haven't had any issues, and I've built Pokemon Emerald at least a dozen times by now, just with testing out different things. The next step will actually take a little bit longer than this step does, because we're going to be actually installing the database for the Pokemon game itself, not just the development. It's still very, very easy. And you'll know when it's done because it will get back to the command input where it will have the green and blue text with your directory. That colored warning text can look pretty scary, but as I said, don't worry about it. Let it run its course. Just about done. Okay. Now, to install the database for the Pokemon game itself, period, slash install .sh space 2 periods slash, and I'm going to type Poke Emerald. Now, if you had done Ruby or Fire Red, you would just substitute like that, or like this. But again, because I chose Emerald, hit enter, and AGBCC successfully installed, and we are done with that. So we can close again, and just to see, we have inside Poke Emerald, we have all these files, and inside AGBCC, we have all these files. One last time, Windows R, WSL, enter. Here we are again back into Linux. We are going to go into Decomps. We can do directory to see that we still have the 2 files. We will go into Poke Emerald. We can type in directory to see everything. Now it's time to build the ROM, and this is the part that will take the longest amount of time. The first time you build it is always the longest. Once you rebuild the ROM after you have made any changes, it will not take as long. This is because when you first compile it, it has to go through and take all the graphics, all the scripts, all the items, all the Pokemon. It has to build everything and load it into the ROM. So, we are going to type make, and then if you did Poke Ruby, you would type Ruby. Alternatively, if you wanted the updated versions of Ruby, you would do make Ruby Rev 1 or Rev 2. If you wanted Sapphire, you would do make Sapphire, and then Rev 1 or Rev 2 if you wanted the updated versions. That's if you went with Poke Ruby. If you went with Poke Fire Red, you would do make Fire Red, and then alternatively you could do Rev 1, or you could type make Leaf Green, and then if you wanted Rev 1. There is no revision 2 for Fire Red or Leaf Green. We went with Pokemon Emerald, so the only thing that we can do is make Emerald, and then you can choose how many processor threads you want to dedicate to the make. So, to find out how many threads you have, you can type in inproc, and you can see it says 12 because I have 6 cores, 12 threads. So, we will type make Emerald -J 10, and then hit enter. This will compile everything. Oh, my bad. For Emerald, you don't have to type Emerald because there's only one version of the game. Make J10. Hit enter, let it run its course. This is the part that takes the longest, as I said. For some reason I thought you had to type make Emerald, but you do not. Because there's only one version of the game, and there's no revision. So, as I said with Poke Ruby, you would type make Ruby and do the revision. If you went with Poke Fire Red, you would type make Fire Red or make Leaf Green with the revision if you wanted. But if you went with Poke Emerald, you just type make. And don't forget the -J and then however many threads you want. I went with 10 instead of 12 for a couple of reasons. One is I'm recording and running a VM, and there's background processes. So I don't want to bunch all of my threads into a single thing because, well, I'm recording and there's background processes. I want to leave some threads dedicated for other stuff. Because I believe, actually, there's no difference in the amount of time between using 10 threads and 12 threads because of how the processor works. So, if you have an i3 or a Ryzen 3, you would have 8 threads, and so you would want to probably use like 5 or 6 to compile the ROM to leave some room for other stuff on your computer. An i5, Ryzen 5, you have 12 threads, so I'd say 10 should be good enough. That's what I've always used. It takes about 8 to 10 minutes for the ROM to compile. If you have something like an i9 or like a Ryzen 9 5950, you'll have like whatever, like 20 threads or something. So you could dedicate like 18 threads to the project. So I think I'm going to cut until something else happens. And when it is all done and done, we will be back to the directory with the green and blue text, and I can load the ROM into the emulator and show you that it actually worked. For the emulator, I recommend IMGBA. It's up to date. It works very well. The configurations are pretty nice, so I will be back when something updates in this terminal. Okay, so this is going now. While it's going and compiling, I'm going to go off on a tangent and give a little bit of pretext on Pokemon hacking and my history with Pokemon hacking. Way back in the day, 10, 12 years ago, we used to do this thing called binary hacking. And we would take the ROM and edit the ROM file directly. You would need like 100 different programs. The programs were old, they were never updated, they were prone to crashes. You would have to inject stuff into the ROM, but first you'd have to find free space, and then you'd have to assign an unused offset to that free space, and it was a mess. You could jumble up the code, and there's a 50-50 chance whether it would work or it would corrupt the ROM. If it corrupted the ROM, you lose everything, and you have to start over from scratch. Some of the other stuff like mapping was okay, it was manageable. But then you get into stuff like scripting or tile map editing, palette editing. You have to index images, and using programs like UNLZ and GBA was awful. Advanced palette editor was awful. PokeScript was the one that I used for scripting, and that was severely outdated. I never learned XSE, but stuff like that was just, it was tedious. There was crashes all the time. Viruses. It was just a time sink. Now with Decomp, we have access to the whole game in its entirety. We have access to all the graphics on the fly. We have access to all the scripts on the fly. we have access to the very source code of the game itself. So, and it's much easier to make backup copies. And modifying the files is a little bit more straightforward. You don't have to worry about offsets or finding free space or nothing like that. It's much more convenient. I'm still learning how to do it. So the goal of this whole entire tutorial series is going to be a teaching and learning experience. I'm going to be teaching how to do things based off of what I have learned from other people. So I'm not claiming that I've discovered things. I'm just going to gather information from various resources, learn how it works, try it out, and then make a video regurgitating that information out. So I will be learning and teaching at the same time. I got really involved with binary hacking back in the day. I had a separate YouTube channel, tens of thousands of views, people making videos based off of my videos. I kind of piggybacked off the success of one other guy because he had been out of the hacking scene for a while by the time I hopped in. So I learned everything that he did, and I was able to branch off from that. But now with Decomp stuff, everybody's all working together. People are finding stuff out, sharing information. GitHub is such an amazing resource. And, well, I'm back into hacking videos. I'm gonna be developing my own Pokemon hack, but I might make videos on it. I don't know. I'm gonna keep it as a separate project from the tutorial series. The tutorial series is going to revolve around Pokemon Emerald, as this is the one that I've chosen to install. But I'm going to have a separate folder as my project, my main project, that I'm going to develop. And I'm kind of thinking about doing Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire instead of Emerald. I haven't really thought about it completely just yet. Back in the day with binary hacking, Fire Red was the way to go. Everybody did Fire Red. And I'm still kind of burnt out on that, even though it's been like 10 years. And I could never understand binary hacking for Ruby. But now that we have the whole Decomp thing, I think I might be wanting to take a crack at it. This should be close to done. And again, once it's finished, I'm going to show the end result of the built game running in the emulator. And because we're building it from the source code, we don't have to worry about the internal battery being dry. That won't happen for another 10 years. And yeah, it's done. So we will go into the Decomps folder, Poke Emerald. If we scroll down to the bottom, or close to the bottom, you can see PokeEmerald.gba. 16 megabytes GBA file. Let's drag it onto MGBA. Just like that. It's almost like magic. And the last thing I'm going to mention is whenever you modify the code, whenever you make a script, whenever you change a map, whenever you change graphics or anything, you have to remake the ROM. So after you make any adjustments, changes, edits, anything, you will just type make J and then your thread count, and you will be good to go. Unless if it's like ruby, sapphire, fire, leaf green, where it's a difference, then you would do the make ruby or make sapphire and then your processor thread count. Anytime you make any changes, you have to remake the ROM, but it will not take as long as the first build. The first build draws from the graphics and everything. The builds after that only draw from what has been changed. Hopefully this tutorial has been straightforward enough to be understandable. The top of the description is going to have that notepad document. If there's any questions, you can Google search stuff, or you can ask me in the comments. You can go to the Pokey community forums, ask questions there. There's tons and tons of knowledgeable and talented people there. Thank you for watching. I will have more tutorials in the future.